Welcome to the Liberty Minute with Jared Hudson. Jared is a former U.S. Navy SEAL sniper and is the founder and current CEO of Covenant Rescue Group. Join in as Jared brings real-world experience and offers a fresh take on the topics that matter most.
Hey guys, Jared here, bringing you your Liberty Minute today. It's 2025 now, and we got the cold weather upon us. I apologize for my voice if it sounds a little hoarse. We've been going through the normal crud this time of year in the house, but thank goodness we haven't had anything too crazy. And me and the wife and the kids are all staying well, and it seems like everybody else in the family is. Today on the Liberty Minute, we're going to be covering the Third Amendment, which for all intents and purposes is sort of obsolete to where we are nowadays with what the wording actually says. But we're going to talk about a few things that might give us some insight and some specific application on how this amendment can continue to regulate government intrusion into our lives, but also keep us where we need to be. Because again, the Bill of Rights, it outlines the lines that government can't pass. That's the purpose of it, and that's the purpose of going over. We've already covered the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, and those are still very much in use today, even in the same application that they were back when when our founding fathers wrote them into existence. And all these amendments are there lines that government can't cross, but it also gives us a framework and how we should live our lives and expect our neighbors to live their lives. So the Third Amendment says, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So it wasn't that you couldn't harbor soldiers. It wasn't that harboring soldiers or harboring fighters was bad, even if the government made a law that said, hey, this is something that needs to happen. There were times for that. We see that in the Civil War, which was 50, 60, no, it's probably closer to 80 years after these amendments were written into place. We see people harboring soldiers in a positive way, whether for the North or for the South. But the fact of the matter is this is relatively obsolete because we don't have soldiers marching around our streets. I'll use an example just up the road in Pleasant Grove, Alabama. There was a tornado that went through probably about 15 years ago. It destroyed the city. It went from Tuscaloosa all the way up through up the I-59 corridor, up through Pleasant Grove, and it destroyed it terribly. And they brought the National Guard in for disaster relief. And my wife's family, they're from Pleasant Grove, and talking to some of them talking about the National Guard guys that were out in Pleasant Grove working through it and being tied close to that and knowing a lot of the National Guard guys who did work it. One of the things that happened is you have National Guard or ultimately, U.S. Army soldiers on the ground for disaster relief, and people were bringing them into their homes, taking care of them. They were helping them out, giving them food, giving them waters. They're going around helping guard the area, clean the debris. Same thing with sheriff's deputies that were going in. So that would be a real close and personal example of when, hey, this disaster has happened, everybody's working together to help each other out. So that's not so much what this Third Amendment applies to. What it originally applied to was the forced quartering of British soldiers during the Revolutionary War and really before the Revolutionary War, where they would come in, they would eat all the food in the house. They would force people out of their house, sort of like what you see in the movies nowadays where a cop holds up the badge and says, hey, I'm commandeering this vehicle, takes a person out of the vehicle and drives away in their car chasing the bad guy. That doesn't happen in reality. That would be a good example of maybe a Third Amendment violation or close to a Third Amendment violation, even though that vehicle might be an extension of a house. But either way, the best example that we can come up with of that would be that Hollywood move of get out of your car, this is mine. That's not something that we have to do in this nation. That's not something that generally is going to happen. I'm a law enforcement officer. I know many law enforcement officers, and none of them are going to do that. So as a quick bullet point, this just prevents the government from forcing citizens to house soldiers or actors of the government in their home. Okay, so that's the biggest thing, is the use of force, the government forcing us to allow certain people in our home. The applicability, it applies during times of peace. So there's absolute prohibition during times of peace. During times of war, like the Civil War, we gave an example, it does require a legal framework. And finally, it requires the owner's consent. It is your home, right? You have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Your life, liberty, and your property are how you do that, or how you pursue happiness. So housing soldiers requires the property owner's consent, unless ultimately it is prescribed by law during a time of war. The historical context we already talked about, because it's just British practices during the colonial era, particularly to the Courting Acts, and in modern relevance. This has not been litigated very often, but it underscores the principles of privacy and property rights. Now, this is something that's very important. Property rights. Not too long ago, we saw mobs and taking over cities in 2020, going into people's yards and in people's houses. And even though those are not government officials, oftentimes they're acting out, maybe they're acting out legitimately their First Amendment right, but it is not their right to go into your property and destroy your property and stay in your property. And all of the things that we saw over the news throughout, 2020, 2021, 2022, and even now, as we get ready for an inauguration of a new president, we see gangs that have taken over different apartment complexes and things like that. The Third Amendment, I would argue, extends to those individuals as well. It's not just the government taking over your house, but it's somebody coming in and taking over your property by force. They're essentially stealing your right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or your right to life, liberty, and property, as John Locke would outline it. So it's important for us to understand that our Third Amendment can't be rained on by anybody, and the government should stand to protect the Third Amendment of the citizens, those who are being run roughshod over by criminals in society who are taking over their homes. That is the job of the government, to protect the people. And that is vitally important to our society and our free society. Another thing that gets into a broader application that I really think is interesting is surveillance. There's a lot of debates on government surveillance. We've seen that with the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, and kind of how they surveil, especially under the FISA warrant process and all of that stuff that goes on. I'm in vehement opposition to that, and I think most of our legislators should be in vehement opposition to it as well. You should be in vehement opposition to it, because that's government intrusion into our private homes and in our lives, whether with cameras through TVs, whether with our phones. Any sort of monitoring, especially home time monitoring in my house, is vitally important, that we don't cross that line, because then we're not really free. We see that going on in China. We see it going on in other countries around the world, but it should not go on here in the United States of America, because we have outlined in the Constitution of our country that these are things that are not given to us by government. They are given to us by God. They're God-ordained rights that we already have, that we should, that government should not intrude upon, or anybody else for that matter, and government should solely protect these. The last thing I'll give is the eminent domain discussions. The use of private property for public purposes, like eminent domain, over where a road goes through, they can take some of your property, or, power lines and things like that. I have not been well studied on that. I don't know how much of that still goes on. I know there was probably a lot of that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, as the infrastructure of the U.S. was really being built, maybe even a little bit beforehand. But again, I think that we see some possible Third Amendment violations when the government says, hey, we have eminent domain to do X, Y, and Z. Anything that is yours, especially as it comes to your resident, your home, your castle, where your family lives, that is your right. It is God-given, and it's on you to protect that at all costs. And it's for the government to help you protect that, to make sure that no one runs roughshod over you and they don't force you to give up your right to privacy. The last thing I'll leave you with is, I've heard many people say, well, hey, I've got nothing to hide. I've got nothing to hide. That's not the point. The point is not that you have anything to hide. The point is that the government doesn't have the right to find out if you have anything to hide. Oftentimes, we give up our liberties so that we can feel somewhat secure. And Thomas Jefferson says, those who give up their liberties to feel secure will have neither liberty nor security. It's important that we understand that these are God-given, that these are the written word of our country, the written constitution of our country that outline things that are not written. They're written on the hearts of man from the revealed word of God, which is ultimately in the word of Christ and the word of Jesus Christ in the Bible. We see that in the New Testament and even in the Old Testament, the fulfillment of the law, and the natural word of God, which we see around us, Romans chapter 1. All can be seen about God and his divine nature through that which is created. And this is what our forefathers said. It said that these are the things that you have given to you by God, not by government, not by another man, but by God. And the Third Amendment was one of them, and that's your right to your property. They're your right to be safe and secure in your own property so that you don't have to harbor a soldier in time of peace in a quartered house without the consent of you, the owner, only in a manner prescribed by law if it's in a wartime, which does change how we do things, and it even changes it scripturally. So it's important to understand your right to your property, especially your home. That's your Liberty Minute for today.